Welcome to today's chat about creating a writer's workshop in your classroom. And I'm joined by second grade teacher, Karen Arnold. Karen, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you about how you nurture your young writers. Will you just introduce yourself? Tell us where you are and where you teach?
My name is Karen Arnold, and I teach second grade at Liberty Elementary in Bismarck. This is my 9th year of teaching in the district.
9 years in the classroom. What made you seek out, or what kind of prompted you to try to reimagine how you were teaching writing in your classroom? What led you to the writer's workshop?
So when I first started in the district, our grade level was just beginning to explore standards-based report cards and what that looked like. And here we had these writing standards that we needed students to be able to write certain things like an opening and a closing, and having several facts or details in their story, sequencing words, all those things. And I, as most people that I encounter, did not have a lot of education as far as in the writing process. You go through your math class, you go through your reading class, but in college, that was not the focus for my reading class. And so I needed to find a way to teach these kids how to be writers. Our district is so awesome, and they offer PD classes where you can go after school and learn. And so the first class that I took was based on Ralph Fletcher's book, Writer's Workshop, or Writing Workshop, excuse me. And so that kind of just ignited my passion for writing. And so that was about 7 years ago or so that I did that. And so it's kind of been building since then. The next year, a great author by the name of Kelly Boswell came in, and she came into our schools during the day, and she gave us more PD on what writer's workshop should look like. And I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's not a lot of curriculum for teachers out there. They don't hand you a book that says, this is how you teach writing. You really need to meet your students where they're at. And so I feel like part of that process is just gathering the materials that you need, teacher resources, mentor texts, all of those things, and having a stockpile so that you can meet your students' needs. I just think there isn't that curriculum like there is for math. There's no scope and sequence for writing. You really have to look at how your writers are writing and go from there. If they need punctuation, then you go there. If they need voice in their writing, you go there. And so there's not one right or wrong way to teach writing.
And that creates some anxiety, because there is that. I really appreciated your honesty of saying that you didn't feel like you were trained in how to do this, that wasn't an emphasis when you were going through your teacher training program. So there is that anxiety of, I don't want to do it wrong. I don't want to screw these kids up. Right. I don't want to mess them up as writers for the rest of their lives. But when you do gather those resources, what you just described of being able to react to the needs of those kids in front of you, because we also know that from year to year, cohorts of students can be very different. And so one group can come in, and on day one, they maybe they're pretty good at a certain set of skills. And so having a set locked in writing curriculum might be kind of limiting in a weird way, because you're not able to be as flexible. So it's very scary, but by being able to focus on that skills checklist, as you were saying, the impetus for this process, now you have this very beautiful place where you can really be tailoring the writing instruction to the kids who are actually in front of you.
And I think that's a good jumping off point. If your district has those rubrics and you don't know where to start, you start with lessons based on those rubrics, because that's a great place to start, because that's kids at this level need to have those skills. And so, if you're unsure or you're feeling nervous about Writer's Workshop, that's the great place to start. Or even, just using your standards from another district. If you don't know what that should look like, if your district doesn't have rubrics already created, it's easy enough to go and find those standards online and see what second graders should be doing, or eighth graders, or 12th graders as far as writing.
We're going to hop to our resources for anyone who's joining in on the video. This resource deck is in the link in the video description, so you don't need to take notes. Everything is linked here for you. But you had some very lovely concrete tips for just what are some of just the logistics for getting started if you want to craft and really nurture writers in your classroom.
Sure. I just think the first step in building Writers Workshop is to make sure that you have an environment that breathes writing every day. You want to do writing from the first day until the last day, because that's what's important to kids. You need to make sure that you have things in your classroom like a pencil sharpener, things available for writing, a stapler. That's the big darn deal in our classroom. You're going to let us use a stapler and a tape dispenser? And we get choices in our paper? Well, yes, just surrounding kids with those tools that make them a writer, the computers, just those different tools will help students feel like they are a writer. And then I think the next step is just building that into your schedule. And so on the first day, I don't expect students to write more than like 3 to 5 minutes. But what I am creating is an experience for them as a writer. And that first day, that 3 to 5 minutes, I can tell a lot about students. I can tell that I have some nervous writers. I can tell that I have passionate writers. I can tell, if students need help with punctuation right away or capital letters. And that first day of writing can drive my lessons for the first couple of weeks of school. And I work with younger students. And so the expectation at the start is maybe to write for 5 to 10 minutes. When you look at older students, they may be able to have stamina for like 30 minutes. But I think you have to build that ability to be a writer.
But I think that's really vital that you set the tone day one. That's crucial. That writing is just an intrinsic part of the fabric of our classroom, that we write in this space. I don't know how it is the first few days in elementary, but at the high school level, we can get so focused on this is the syllabus, and this is where these are the classroom procedures, and this is where you hand everything in. And we need that. We do need that organization of like just how does class function. But that first day also really sets a tone. So what story do we want to be writing for our class, and what tone are we setting if we don't have students write on the first day?
Exactly. And then I think some other key pieces built into your schedule, making sure that you do have a lesson or a purpose for each day, and keeping it short. I think if we are going to drone on about the craft of writing over and over again, and it becomes this long half-hour lesson, students become disengaged with writing as well. So that lesson needs to be as exciting as you want their writing to be. And then I think being purposeful about allowing an audience for students, whether that be each other or you, or maybe it's the whole class, or just giving them an opportunity to make sure that they're sharing their writing with somebody every day. It doesn't need to be a big to-do, but some of those special moments where it is a big to-do helps them celebrate that they are a successful writer.
I like that reminder that even for little kids, but I think this is true for my high schoolers as well, they can get really excited about not that exciting of things. So that reminder that like empowering them as writers, that yes, they can use a stapler when they need to. They can choose what type of paper. And tell us about the little pen caddy that you have here, because that was over your shoulder too. Because that's just such a creative, cheap way to have like some like a little bit of bling in your writing corner.
Yeah, I needed a way to store supplies and a lot of them because writers, they need pens, they need pencils, colored pencils, markers, crayons, pencil sharpeners, any number of things, scissors. And I want those tools right at their hands so that their ability to be a writer is not taken away because they can't find a pencil or it's taken away because their marker is dried out or whatever. And so I found this nice little wine rack and then I inserted some cups and there you go. You have a great storage center. And I think it's one of the pieces that I'm most excited to put out every year because, it's just like a special little treat for me to share writing tools with students.
In addition to the like hard tools of the craft, the pens, paper, staplers, things like that, you are also equipping students with some other tools to support them in their writing journey. So you've got some group word wall, a word finder, and then like some prompts. Tell us about some of the things, these other little pictures.
So I'm just going to hold this up. I don't know if you can see it or not because I cannot see myself. But this is a personal word wall. And so when kids are feeling uncomfortable with their spelling, I really just have them bring that over to me instead of making a big to-do out of like, well, where are you going to find this? So, go look it up in the dictionary. If it's a word that I know that is not one that they're ever going to be able to spell on their own, I'll just quick jot it down on their word wall. They're off on their way and they can continue being a writer. At second grade, and even I would say in all of elementary school, spelling is scary. There's this expectation that everything needs to be spelled perfectly and correct. And that's not the case. What I really want kids to do is just get their writing down on their paper. Things don't need to be perfect or drafted correctly that first time because no writer does that in real life. The experienced writers have words that are spelled wrong. That's why they have an editor, and so then if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, I also have a class word wall. And this was just the best way for me to store it because I don't have a lot of wall space in my room. I know other teachers put out the big word wall and they have a whole wall of words. But I think what you really need to focus on when you're planning what kind of tools you want is what's going to make it most accessible to kids. Kids can grab that ring and go bring it back to their desk and then return it when they're done. And it's not, I brought some over, and so it's got just some words that I would expect kids to spell correctly. It's nothing fancy, but I think it's a tool that students have used for the past 3 years since I started using it. And it makes them more aware of how words should be spelled.
They have some quick support tools, whether it's going to the word wall that's up for the whole class or coming to you individually, maybe even talking to a friend. But I really appreciate what you're also modeling for them, that as we write, there are different stages to our writing. And in that first stage of writing, as we're getting our ideas down, spelling doesn't matter that much. That it's about getting the ideas down. So that's something that you talk to them about.
Yes, and so that would be, some of my mini lessons towards the beginning of the year. What do we do if we don't know how to spell a word? What are the tools that are available for us? Is it a friend? Is it the rings on the wall? Is it our personal word wall? Is it just underlining the word, letting my reader know that I didn't know how to spell this word and moving on? So there's all kinds of mini lessons on spelling consciousness and teaching that to kids and giving them the ability to feel safe as writers to make a spelling error.
It would seem to me that support and that safety of it's okay to make a spelling error also helps shift in terms of how comfortable writing is, that writing is safer, that it's okay. It's not, there isn't a right and wrong answer. We're going to go through this whole process as writers, but this first step is just about getting your ideas down. So I really appreciate that you're modeling that with spelling, but I also assume that those are conversations that carry over into other things. Like, that's right, you might not know how to use a semicolon. That's okay. You might not know how to do this. And that is part of the learning and writing process.
And the biggest place where I see kids grabbing the rings during the day is actually during mathematics when they want to spell the number words correctly. So they're using it across the board, or even during calendar math when they want to know how to spell November. And it's, like those kinds of things. So they're pulling it at other times of the day because they are now spelling aware that they don't know how to spell it, and it's okay that I don't know how to spell it, and where's my tool to help me spell it. And so it's kind of a neat thing to build that safety net for kids, that it's okay, it's going to be okay, because that can be one of the scariest things for kids as writers, is that spelling piece.
And then you also have the other ring that we have a little picture of, is you have some ideas. I cannot tell you how many times I hear this from older students. Well, I don't know what to write about. Like, what am I even supposed to be writing about? I don't know. And so you've also created a safety net for that situation of how you support and create that writing environment. If somebody is stuck, how do you help them get unstuck?
And some of the greatest people that I've heard speak, one of the things that they've really encouraged me to do is just get students to be able to talk out a story, tell a story, tell me your story. And so one of the things that I've learned is just to have at the beginning of the year something called a turn and talk topic. And in the elementary school, we have what's called turn and talk partners. And so they have a buddy at the rug or at their table where they can turn and feel safe to tell a story or anything like that. And so the ring in the bottom left-hand corner of this screen is my turn and talk topics that I have available for us to talk about at the beginning of the year. It gets kids thinking about a silly topic or an opinion. And then as we're turning and talking, that might be your topic if you are unable to figure out what to write about. It's got silly things like, what's the weirdest food you've ever eaten, or what has been your favorite Halloween costume? They're all stories that kids are able to tell, that they're connected to. And I think it becomes them personal to them. And if they're able to verbalize their story, then I can say to them, okay, now go write your story. And it feels safe then.
And I think that's something that transcends age level. I could see as juniors are working on their research papers, or anyone's working on a research task, to be in strategic pairs, and the writer has just the floor to just be telling where are you at in your story, and like, what are the things that you've learned so far, and to have the listener help jot some of those things down. So I also wonder if something, like Flipgrid would be helpful for students to record their thoughts and their story, and then be able to listen back to that to get ideas for actually writing something out.
Sure. And I have a great mentor text. It's called I Am a Story. And it's one I try to do at the beginning of the year, because it talks all about how the first stories that were ever told were actually verbalized and passed down from generation to generation. And from there, that's when we finally had paper, that's when we were able to write it down. And so that's what a great story for getting kids to just speak and verbalize their thoughts and their ideas.
This is a great time maybe just to shift to some of these mentor texts, because you have so many great things. I asked you about writing prompts, and I loved your response that you said, yes, you have those prompts as a safety net and kind of so that when kids get stuck, but that you really use mentor texts to help model writing. Can you just talk about the power of a mentor text and what that does for a kid?
Sure. So another thing to keep kids safe at the beginning of the school is I try to find mentor texts that will apply to all writers. So Ralph Tells a Story is in the bottom left-hand corner, and it's a great story about a young man who does everything in his power to skip out on writing because he thinks he's not a writer. And so the water fountain is interesting. Laying under his desk is interesting. His stinky Band-Aid, just everything is so interesting. And then the power of this story is that Ralph eventually finds out that he has so many stories to tell. And I think this story connects really well with those kids who think that they're non-writers or that they can't write. And then they find that stinky Band-Aid story, or they find the story about the spider out at recess, or the inchworm that Ralph tells. And so it's a great story to keep kids feeling safe in the classroom, and that, yeah, some days we're going to have writer's block, and that's okay. And it happens to the best writers.
These are kind of mentor texts in this set for Text to Start the Year. You've curated a nice little set of books that really help mentor the writing process.
Yes, and so the best story is about a young girl who wants to write and win this writing contest through her library. And everybody in the story is telling her what she should write about, but nothing feels right. And it's great conversation with kids to talk about what you know about, and you write about what you care about. And that's the best story to tell, because otherwise, if you try to tell somebody else's story, it's just not a good fit for us. And then the last book on there is called The Word Collector. And it's a wonderful story about this young man who collects all these fabulous words. And in my classroom, we call them $1 million words, because they're worth $1 million. We don't encounter them every day. And so those words are special. And it's just a great way to connect kids with language. And how can you make your writing interesting by using some language that you wouldn't normally use if you were just speaking to somebody?
I like that idea of $1 million words. And it's also a nice reminder that you wouldn't necessarily use them all the time. Not only do you not encounter them all the time, as a writer, you might not use them all the time. You're going to use them sparingly because they cost a lot.
They do. They're expensive.
You've also outlined for folks some really great mentor texts by topic, as well as some of the writing tasks that might kind of mirror those texts. So wherever you want to start, you've given us so many ideas. Don't feel obligated to talk about all of these.
I'll talk about a few of my favorites.
Okay.
So as part of our district and our standards for North Dakota, some of the topics of writing are narrative writing, opinion writing, and informational writing. And so throughout the year, I try to touch on all of those topics. And so some of my favorite books, Those Shoes is one of the best ones that I read every year. And I use it for we read it multiple times, because not only can we look at it as a writer, but we can also look at it as a reader. And so it's just a really great book for narrative writing. But if you look at those books, they all have a purpose. So like Let's Get a Pup has great punctuation in it for talking about having a character speak in my story. So it has the quotation marks, and it's just a great book to teach children how to have a conversation within your writing.
And modeling dialogue in that way.
Yes, modeling dialogue and teaching them how, because part of our goal is to get them ready for third grade. And in third grade, they start adding dialogue into their writing. And so that's just a great book for that. The Relatives Came is just a silly book to get kids to think about, telling their story about a time that they spent time with their relatives. And then The Shortcut has a kind of a surprise ending. And so it teaches children how to add that kind of surprise ending or lesson at the end. And then A Moment in Time, you can't see it. It's in the bottom right-hand corner of that picture. It's just a great story to teach kids about how our writing doesn't need to be this long to do about what happened on Monday, what happened on Tuesday, what happened on Wednesday, and going on and on and on. But what we want to do is just capture a small moment in time and tell that story. And then we might come back the next day and tell another story.
And that really mirrors all of those things, mirror the narrative writing topics that you've compiled there, because all of those are about a moment in time, not... And yes, in a young life, it's a much longer process than it is at this point in my life. But so they have all of these skills that are being modeled, these different narrative devices, and then you give them the opportunity to then explore that in those writing topics.
Yeah, so we might read a story like The Shortcut, but then I don't expect children to write a story about trains. Instead, I want them to create that experience like they did. Like maybe you've got a personal story where it's a surprise ending, like your tooth actually popped out of your mouth when dad tied a string around it, or a moment in time. Yeah, it's about drinking lemonade on the porch, but I've never drank lemonade on my porch before because I don't have a porch. But what moment in time did I spend with my family that I can tell a story about?
That's perfectly explained. I really like that it's not about copying this story, it's about modeling this narrative technique. And then you also provide them, and just from the titles of the opinion texts, you can get a sense of some of the argumentative writing that might be coming, and as well as some of the voices of, if I've never read Can I Be Your Dog? But what a great opportunity for students to maybe think about writing from a different voice in their story, and like writing as a different type of character.
I have to say that opinion writing is my all-time favorite one to teach. I just think it gives it so much opportunity for voice, and like some of the hilarious things that kids write based on these books that are in the picture is amazing. And I think my favorite one is the spoon writing. It's in the perspective of the spoon, who really he thinks that his job is like the worst of the utensils, and everybody else wants to be like Spoon because he gets to do things like eat ice cream, take a bath in hot chocolate. And so after we read that book, then I do have students kind of write about which one is your favorite utensil. And another one that students really love is if you ever bring an alligator to school, don't. And the cool part is, last year I had a student write a great piece based on that book, and we sent it to the author via Twitter, and she wrote back to us. And how powerful is that? Like, so there's so many opportunities to connect with these authors through our writing as well, which gives power to students. But yeah, those are kind of my two favorites. And then the last one I would talk about is the restaurant reviews that we've done. The past 3 years, my students have written letters to restaurants and just told the restaurant how much they like that place and why. And the power is that we in return have received letters from those restaurants saying thank you for pointing out the positives. We always hear the negatives about our restaurants, and it's just a wonderful experience, and it gives purpose to student writing.
That purpose and that authentic audience is so important. And so the fact that you're able to build some of those things, you mentioned this to me, but that when they do their favorite utensil, you have them hang those in the cafeteria.
Yeah, and so once we finish that piece of writing, then we hang them in the cafeteria so students can enjoy their writing while they're waiting in line to get their lunch. And it's fun to watch kids standing against the wall, just staring at the wall, reading writing. And it makes kids so proud that somebody else has spent the time to read their writing.
Yeah, that's pretty mind-blowing that someone else actually took the time to read what I wanted to write. There's also a gift that your students are providing for the rest of the school of just this idea that writing is something that we can experience anywhere. And so whether it's here in the cafeteria or in the library, there's an opportunity to really explore that writing in a lot of different places. But that authenticity is key. We have to have, but back to your point about safety, I would imagine that you're not writing those letters to restaurants the first week of school.
Oh no, it's like right about now in the school year. Once we're confident in our ability to be a writer and know that we have an opinion and that it's okay to share our opinion, and there's all those like fine-tuning details like capital letters and punctuation, and making sure that we are able to do that independently before we can send off our writing to other places.
And that authenticity, but like you said, that audience and that purpose, like who are you writing for? And back to all of those tools and that scaffolding that you were building in for kids. If I go all the way back here to these tools and these resources and those mini lessons you referenced, now the level of editing that we're going to do for a piece that we're going to mail to someone in the public might be a different amount of editing than we would do if we're just going to share something within the classroom. But similarly, something that we're going to hang up in the cafeteria and have other kids be able to see, now we maybe, like, that ups the game in terms from an editing standpoint.
Sure. And I think that goes back to also kind of, you need to have a lesson on the levels of writing and who am I writing for and what is my purpose. Not all pieces have a purpose, and then kids say, well, why do I have to write this? I'm just writing it for you. And so giving them that purpose of, we're going to send off this letter, or we're going to hang it in the hallway, or we're going to put it in the library with our artwork, those giving writing a purpose makes it more meaningful too. There's always a reason. This next slide is, these are some of my favorite books to read. And I guess I've said that every time, right? That these are all my favorite books to read. But
that modeling that joy, I know we haven't talked about that, but talk about really, if there was one mentor text, quote unquote, that we as teachers can give to our students, it's modeling sincere joy at reading and writing and all of the subjects, right? We have to be excited about teaching math. So your excitement, yes, you have said that every time. I'm like, oh, these are my favorites. But that authentic joy that you are mentoring and nurturing by being that authentic teacher and having that joy for your students, that's a mentor text in and of itself.
I think we have to show that passion, even if we're scared about writing and we didn't enjoy writing, or we don't enjoy writing personally. We have to share that passion with our kids, or we have to fake it, because otherwise they're going to read into us what, she hates writing. Why do I have to write? Or if you groan every time you need to teach writing, they're going to groan with you. And that kind of takes away the excitement from writing. And I think that's our job as an educator. We need to just exude excitement about everything we do, whether we like it or not. And I think once we start exuding it, I feel like I start feeling it, even if I'm on people. So
it's that fake it till you make it as well.
Yeah,
it's a great strategy as a teacher, that if you're having a crappy day, pretend that you're not. And frequently by the end of the day, you feel a lot better. But why do you love these informational texts?
One of the things that kids really struggle with is giving an opening or a beginning to our writing and telling our writer what we're going to be writing about. And so these mentor texts really help focus our bold beginnings per se, or help us think about writing as a writer, and how am I going to tell my reader what am I writing about. And so each one of these mentor texts has a great way to introduce students to different types of openings. So whether it be humor and chameleons are cool, or alliteration, asking a question is the tornadoes and hurricanes. And then my favorite one is the frogs one, because it has a riddle. And then watching students go back and take your riddle format and use that in their writing. I think it's like splish splash, what's that sound? What is hopping all around? It's a frog. And then it goes into then you can take that pattern and that format, and students can apply it to whooping cranes or snails or whatever they want. And students have actually used that for those.
That's the power of those mentor texts, is you're giving them those little starters. It's kind of like a sentence stem, but in a more abstract way, that you're giving them that structure so that they can dive into their writing. In addition to these mentor texts, one of the things that we talked about, and I put it earlier on in here, we talked about having writer conferences. that this is something that is part of this process. So as a teacher, if I'm in my classroom, okay, so I've started the year off. I've started the year off writing day one. I've got it built into my schedule. I'm watching my kids. I'm seeing what their needs are, and I'm designing mini lessons. I've got some tools of support. I've got my supplies. I've got my mentor texts. We're writing. Tell me about the writing conference and how you conference with young writers.
And I think conferring can start day one, and conferring really needs to be safe. Writing is scary. It's uncomfortable. You're vulnerable during writing, and your conference can either make or break your writers. So if you attack a conferring session with a kid and all you do is rip apart what they've done, your spelling is wrong, you don't have capitalization, where is your bold beginning, where are your paragraphs, where it
I'm getting anxious just with you listing them.
But if you start in right away on kids and you're ripping apart them, then they're going to think that they're not a writer. I'm not a writer because she said I can't do capital letters. She said I can't do this. But instead, the conference for the first 3 months really for me is, wow, look at your message. Wow, I enjoyed your story. Wow, you told a great story here. Wow, you chose to use a bold beginning today. I noticed that. I noticed that you did this, and building them up as writers. When students begin to feel safe, and you'll know when they're feeling safe as writers, that's when you can start critiquing their writing. But until that child feels safe in your classroom as a writer, and I'll tell you right now in my classroom, I have 2 or 3 kids that still do not feel safe as writers. And as many times as I have built them up and built them up and built them up, one moment can just bring them back down to that, like, I'm not a writer. So I have to be very careful about how I speak to these children about something so personal as the story where you lost your first tooth, or about the story when your grandma took you out for ice cream. You know, until they feel safe, they cannot, I can't rip apart their writing. So it's a gentle balance with conferring with your writers. And you know, as a teacher, you need those tools in your tool belt. And so one of the things that I did is I made this little conferring book, and I carried this with me for 2 years so that I would be able to confer with writers about topics that were pertinent. So if we're working on bold beginnings as our topic for the lesson, I'm going to focus in on bold beginnings and notice that you put a bold beginning into your writing. Or if you don't have a bold beginning, I can say something as simple as, what do you think you're going to do for your bold beginning? Not, you don't have a bold beginning, you know. Right. So it's the way you frame the question makes it safe for kids as well. And in this conferring, and it comes from Jill Eagleton's book, I think it's called Lighting the Literacy Fire. Here it is. And it comes from her book. There it is, the yellow one in the middle there. It comes from her book, and it just talks, it gives you like a list of different things to confer with writers on. You know, there's punctuation, there's capitalization, there's all of those mechanics that you can confer with kids. But if you're working on bold beginnings, you know, those should be on your list to confer with kids about. Or if in your rubric it says that they need 3 details, going back to that and saying, do you have your details? You know, in the rubric it says here, let's go back and check. You know, those kind of things. Or if you have your ending that you need to have on there. So all of those things are things you could confer with kids about.
So it's not about criticizing. You're getting the kid to look at their writing and asking some guiding questions. So what are you thinking for your attention getter? What are you thinking about your first transition? What are you thinking about doing that? And shifting that instead of pointing out, well, you're missing a transition here, of just making it an invitation instead of an accusation.
Yeah, and I think we all have had those experiences in our life where we get back a paper and it's all drawn all over in red pen, and your teacher had nothing good to say to you. And like that lost hopelessness of like, where do I go now? Like, I don't know where to begin. This is the best I could do. And I think if we're conferring with writers, we need to make them say that, yes, this is the best I can do, and it's good. It's good because I'm being a writer. And I think that's so important at the beginning of the year. I can't stress that enough with my kids. You are a writer. You are a writer, and this is good what you're doing.
And you have a story. I saw this quote. I know I shared it with you, but I saw this quote on Twitter the other day, and it made me think of exactly what you're describing. And it made me think of you and how you coach writers in these conferences, that about meeting students where they are. And so by having this writing workshop format instead of a concrete, strict curriculum, you're meeting students where they're at and you're giving them tailored feedback. You're supporting them as writers. Some kids, some days might not need much from you. Some days they might need a lot more. They might just need that cheerleader of, I was always told that your feedback should be like an Oreo, right? You need to have something positive. You can have your filling can be like a little bit of a critique, and then you need to have that other cookie so that you can hold on to that and have something tasty together to walk away with.
I love that.
But this great focus on seeing the students. And I know I shared with you, I had one of this great student. I mean, just this charismatic young man. He had grown up in a different country, and so he was an English language learner, but he was mainstreamed, and I had him as a junior. And the first day of the next year, he walked into my classroom, and I am embarrassed to admit that I had this moment of, oh, I don't know if I can do another year. I'm not sure if I have the patience to do another year. And I did not have this quote at the ready at that time, but I did immediately chastise myself and say, no, he doesn't deserve that, and you don't deserve that. You're a different teacher than you were a year ago. You're growing. He's a different kid. And I shifted, and instead, because I had him the last year, I chose to use that as an asset. And every conversation we had then about his writing, because he did struggle as a writer, he was far behind where you would expect a senior in high school to be. But instead, every conversation was, man, this is so much better than what you wrote last year. Like, this is a huge improvement. And I really like how you have done X. And it shifted our relationship, and it shifted his attitude in English.
That feels good to kids. That expected. I know what to expect when she's going to come work with me. I know that she's going to say something nice, even if she has something to correct for me. And it's funny that you say that at the beginning, on the first day of school, I give students the assignment to write. And whenever a student might feel like that they're not a writer today, I bring out that piece of writing and I say, look what you did on the first day and look what you're doing now. You are a writer. And, you know, some kids have one word on their paper or 3 words or even 2 sentences. And now they're looking at their writing saying, I'm not a writer. And they have paragraphs upon paragraphs of writing. And so I think that that growth, like where did you start and where are you now, is so powerful. And oftentimes I'll say, you're a writer now to my students, because at the beginning of the year, some of them were not, but you are a writer, you know, and I think that's so powerful for them to hear.
You just mentioned, we didn't talk about this much, you just mentioned that you have that writing piece. How do you help organize all of those artifacts for the students? Is that part of your supply, your toolkit of creating the writer workshop for archiving those things?
So within their desks, students have a writing notebook, they have a writing folder, and then they have options of all kinds of different styles of paper that they want to use, big, small, any, you know, construction paper, anything. But then I also collect writing samples throughout the year as pieces of evidence not only for me, but for them, because it's a gift for them at the end of the year. I give them this writing folder that has a little letter in it that says, I've watched you grow throughout the year, and this is not a gift from me, but a gift from yourself to show you what kind of writer you are. And then I hope that they continue to be writers for the rest of their lives. So it's just kind of a treat for me to see. It's rewarding to see how much they've grown.
I can't think of a better way to show a student that they've been seen and that they have been accepted and that you see them for the talent that they are. And that really is a gift. So I appreciate how you phrase it, that you do say to them, this is a gift that you have given, that they have given themselves. But the act of taking the time to compile all that and be able to show them that you, their teacher, has seen them throughout this whole year and has heard them, that's a really huge gift too.
And I try to put that the oldest piece and the newest piece together at the top. And so then they can see, wow, I really did grow as a writer. And they get the giggles sometimes, like, that's what I did on the first day of school. You've got to be kidding me. Yeah. So it's a great experience for them. And I like to watch them open that gift and just the power in seeing where I was and where I am now is wonderful. It's just an experience. So.
Yeah. So whether you're doing that in a folder or whether you're using an archival system, if you're using something like Seesaw and having students take pictures of those things and sharing those with parents, having some sort of portfolio system should be a goal in your writer's workshop.
If you're just starting out, it's Write This Way from the Start. It's the first 15 days of Writer's Workshop, and that's the blue book in the left-hand side of the screen there. And I just think it's a great tool. If you're just starting out, it's got great opening lessons for your beginning of the year. And those lessons, I think, could be used all the way from kindergarten, all the way, even though it says elementary school, all the way up into the high school to kind of facilitate that safe environment for your classroom. And then the other book that I love is Crafting Nonfiction by Linda Hoyt. And this is like the book that I go to when I need a specific lesson about different things. If my kids need something on poetry, or if I'm working on informational writing, this is a great reference to just jump in. And there's mini lessons and ideas for anchor charts, and everything else is all right in the book. And it's the book that made me feel safe at the beginning. And I just think it's a great tool to have in your toolbox of teacher resources.
If you're looking for some nonfiction mentor texts, you had some great book examples. Dogo News and Newsella are free online websites that have a lot of news articles. Dogo News more so for younger students, and they're pretty entertaining. So if you're just looking for more mentor texts, or to be able to give students some choices in what text they're reading, Dogo News could be a great resource there. There are some mentor text poems and some student examples that are in here. And then all of these books that Karen has been talking about, as well as a few other recommendations. There are links to be able to purchase those books throughout this, and then some additional mentor texts here. This has been a powerful conversation about empowering these little writers.
And I think the biggest thing, if you can get out of anything, is this: you just have to start. You just have to jump in. And I think the first time I started, I remember reading the book Millions of Cats. And it was millions of cats and millions of cats. And there was this repetition in the book. And it's an old, old book. But I pulled it because it was a lesson that somebody had recommended to me. And I jumped in and I started. And then from that, I remember his name was Jacob. And I know he's so old right now that nobody would know who he is. But he brought this beautiful piece of writing to me about millions of flames. And it was a story about a fire. And he had created this piece based on this mentor text. And if I hadn't jumped in and started somewhere, he wouldn't have that beautiful piece of writing, and he wouldn't have created that beautiful piece of writing. And so I, 7 years ago, had to just jump in and start somewhere. And so there's all these opportunities, mentor texts or whatever, to just jump in and try a lesson.
thank you for jumping in and sharing those ideas with us today so that we can maybe jump in with a little bit more support, with a few mentor texts for us as educators to jump in and kick off these writing experiences for our students. You've had 7 years to accumulate these, so hopefully this will help some people kickstart and get a jump start on their writer workshop. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing all of this knowledge.
Thank you for having me and letting me talk about one of my passions.